All right, welcome. So today has just been one of those days, you know? So here is The World as Will and Idea, Volume 3 of 3, this chapter entitled On the Vanity and Suffering of Life. So by Arthur Schopenhauer, of course. I'm just going to read it. Awakened to life out of the night of unconsciousness, the will finds itself an individual. In an endless and boundless world among innumerable individuals, all striving, suffering, erring, and as if through a troubled dream, it hurries back to its old unconsciousness. Yet till then, its desires are limitless, its claims inexhaustible, and every satisfied desire gives rise to a new one. No possible satisfaction in the world could suffice to still its longings, set a goal to its infinite cravings, and fill the bottomless abyss of its heart. Whew. Off to a good start. Then let one consider what, as a rule, are the satisfactions of any kind that a man obtains. For the most part, nothing more than the bare maintenance of this existence itself, extorted day by day, with unceasing trouble and constant care, in the conflict with want and with death in prospect. Everything in life shows that earthly happiness is destined to be frustrated or recognized as an illusion. The grounds of this lie deep in the nature of things. Accordingly, the life of most men is troubled and short. Those who are comparatively happy are so, for the most part, only apparently, seemingly. Or else, like men of long life, they are the rare exceptions, a possibility of which there had to be, as decoy birds. Life presents itself as a continual deception in small things as in great. If it has promised, it does not keep its word, unless to show how little worth desiring were the things desired. Thus, we are deluded now by hope, now by what was hoped for. If it has given, it did so in order to take. The enchantment of distance shows us paradises which vanish like optical illusions when we've allowed ourselves to be mocked by them. Happiness, accordingly, always lies in the future, or else in the past, and the present may be compared to a small dark cloud which the wind drives over the sunny plain. Before and behind it all is bright. Only it itself always casts a shadow. The present is therefore always insufficient, but the future is uncertain and the past irrevocable. Life, with its hourly, daily, weekly, yearly, little, greater, and great misfortunes, with its deluded hopes and its accidents destroying all our calculations, bears so distinctly the impression of something with which we must become disgusted, that it is hard to conceive how one has been able to mistake this and allow oneself to be persuaded that life is there in order to be thankfully enjoyed, and that man exists in order to be happy. Rather, that continual illusion and disillusion, and also the nature of life throughout, present itself to us as intended and calculated to awaken the conviction that nothing at all is worth our striving, our efforts, and struggles. That all good things are vanity, the world, in all its ends, bankrupt, and life a business which does not cover its expenses, its cost, so that our will may turn away from it. The denial of the will to live opens up the way, according to this guy. The way in which this vanity of all objects of the will makes itself known and comprehensible to the intellect, which is rooted in the individual, is primarily time. It is the form by means of which that vanity of things appears as their perishableness. For on account of this, all our pleasures and joys disappear in our hands, and we afterwards ask, astonished, where they have remained. That nothingness itself is therefore the only objective element in time, i.e., that which corresponds to it in the inner nature of things, thus that of which is the expression. Just on this account, time is the a priori necessary form of all our perceptions. In it, everything must present itself, even we ourselves. Accordingly, first of all, our life is like a payment which one receives in nothing but copper pence, and yet must then give a discharge for. The copper pence are the days, the discharge is death. For at last, time makes known the judgment of nature concerning the work of all the beings which appear in it, in that it destroys them. And rightly so, for all that arises is worthy only of being destroyed. Hence were it better that nothing arose. Thus, old age and death, to which every life necessarily hurries on, are the sentence of condemnation on the will to live, coming from the hands of nature itself, and which declares that this will is an effort which frustrates itself. What thou hast wished, it says, ends thus. Desire something better. Hence, the instruction which his life affords to everyone consists as a whole in this, that the objects of his desires continually delude, waver, and fall, and accordingly bring more misery than joy, till at last the whole foundation upon which they all stand gives way, and that his life itself is destroyed, and so he receives the last proof that all of his striving and wishing was a perversity, a false path. Then old age and experience, hand in hand, lead him to death and make him understand, after a search so painful and so long, that all his life he has been in the wrong. We shall, however, enter into the details of the matter, for it is in these views that I have met with most contradiction. First of all, I have to confirm by the following remarks the proof given in the text of the negative nature of all satisfaction, thus of all pleasure and all happiness, in opposition to the positive nature of pain. We feel pain, but not painlessness. We feel care, but not the absence of care. Fear, but not security, not really. We feel the wish as we feel hunger and thirst, but as soon as it has been fulfilled, it is like the mouthful that has been taken, which ceases to exist for our feeling the moment it is swallowed. Pleasures and joys we miss painfully whenever they are wanting, but pains, even when they ceased after having long been present, are not directly missed, but at the most are intentionally thought of by means of reflection. For only pain and want can be felt positively, and therefore announce themselves. Well-being, on the other hand, is merely negative. Therefore, we do not become conscious of the three greatest blessings of life: health, youth, and freedom, so long as we possess them, but only after we have lost them. For they are also negations. We only observe that days of our life were happy after they have given place to unhappy ones. In proportion as pleasures increase, the susceptibility for them decreases. What is customary is no longer felt as a pleasure. Just in this way, however, is the susceptibility for suffering increased. For the loss of what we are accustomed to is painfully felt. Thus, the measure of what is necessary increases through possession, and thereby the capacity for feeling pain. The hours pass the quicker the more agreeably they are spent, and the slower the more painfully they are spent, because pain, not pleasure, is the positive, the presence of which makes itself felt. In the same way, we become conscious of time when we are bored, but not when we are diverted. Both of these cases prove that our existence is most happy when we perceive it least, from which it follows that it would have been better never to have been. Great and lively joy can only be conceived as the consequence of great misery, which has preceded it. For nothing can be added to a state of permanent satisfaction but some amusement, or the satisfaction of vanity. Hence, all poets are obliged to bring their heroes into anxious and painful situations, so that they may be able to free them from them. Dramas and epics, accordingly, always describe only fighting, suffering, tormented men. And every romance is a rare show in which we observe the spasms and convulsions of the agonized human heart. Walter Scott has naively expressed this aesthetic necessity in the conclusion to his novel, Old Mortality. Before so confidently affirming that life is a blessing worth desiring or giving thanks for, let one compare calmly the sum of the possible pleasures which a man can enjoy in his life with the sum of the possible sorrows which may come to him in his life. I believe the balance will not be hard to strike. At bottom, however, it is quite superfluous to dispute whether there is more good or evil in the world, for the mere existence of evil decides the matter. For the evil can never be annulled, and consequently can never be balanced by the good which may exist along with it or after it. 1,000 pleasures are not worth one torment. For that 1,000 had lived in happiness and pleasure would never do away with the anguish and death agony of a single one. And just as little does my present well-being undo my past suffering. If, therefore, the evils in the world were 100 times less than is the case, yet their mere existence would be sufficient to establish a truth which may be expressed in different ways, though always somewhat indirectly. The truth that we have not to rejoice, but rather to mourn at the existence of the world. That its non-existence would be preferable to its existence. That it is something which at bottom ought not to be, etc. Very beautiful is Byron's expression of this truth. Our life is a false nature. 'Tis not in the harmony of things, this hard decree, this uneradicable taint of sin, this boundless upas, this all-blasting tree, whose root is earth, whose leaves and branches be, the skies which rain their plagues on men like dew, disease, death, bondage, all the woes we see, and worse, the woes we see not, which throb through the immedicable soul with heartaches ever new. What's going on there? If the world and life were an end in themselves, and accordingly required theoretically no justification and practically no indemnification or compensation, but existed, for instance, as Spinoza and the Spinocists of the present day represented, as the single manifestation of a God, who, or else in order to mirror himself, undertook such an evolution of himself, and hence its existence neither required to be justified by reasons nor redeemed by results, then the sufferings and miseries of life would not indeed have to be fully equaled by the pleasures and well-being in it. For this, as has been said, is impossible. Because my present pain is never abolished by future joys, for the latter fill their time just as the former fills its time. But there would have to be absolutely no suffering, and death also would either have not to be, or else to have no terrors for us. The fear of death. Only thus would life pay for itself. But since now our state is rather something which had better not have been, everything about us bears the trace of this, just as in hell everything smells of sulfur. For everything is always imperfect and illusory. Everything agreeable is displaced by something disagreeable. Every enjoyment is only a half of one. Every pleasure introduces its own disturbance. Every relief, new difficulties, every aid of our daily and hourly need leaves us each moment in the lurch and denies its service. The step upon which we place our foot so often gives way under us. Nay, misfortunes, great and small, are the elements of our life. And in a word, we are like Phineas, whose food was all tainted and made uneatable by the harpies. 2 remedies for this are tried. First, prudence, foresight, cunning. It does not fully instruct us, is insufficient, and leads to defeat. Secondly, the stoical equanimity, which seeks to arm us against all misfortunes by preparedness for everything and contempt for all. Practically, it becomes cynical renunciation, asceticism, which prefers once for all to reject all means of relief and all alleviations. It reduces us to the position of dogs, like Diogenes in his tub. The truth is, we ought to be wretched, and we are so. The chief source of these serious evils which affect men is man himself. Whoever keeps this last fact clearly in view beholds the world as a hell, which surpasses that of Dante in this respect, that one man must be the devil of another. For this, one is certainly more fitted than all other, an archfiend, indeed, more fitted than all others, appearing in the form of a conqueror, who places several 100,000 men opposite each other and says to them, "To suffer and die is your destiny. Now shoot each other with guns and cannons." And they proceed to do so. In general, however, the conduct of men towards each other is characterized as a rule by injustice, extreme unfairness, hardness, nay, cruelty, an opposite course of conduct appears only as an exception. Upon this depends the necessity of the state and legislation, and upon none of your false pretenses. But in all cases which do not lie within the reach of the law, that regardlessness of his like, peculiar to man, shows itself at once, a regardlessness which springs from his boundless egoism, and sometimes also from wickedness. How man deals with man is shown, for example, by African slavery, the final end of which is sugar and coffee. But we do not need to go so far. At the age of 5 years to enter a cotton spinning or other factory, and from that time forth to sit there daily, first 10 and 12, then ultimately 14 hours, performing the same mechanical labor, is to purchase dearly the satisfaction of drawing breath. But this is a fate of millions, and that of millions more is analogous to it. We others, however, can be made perfectly miserable by trifling misfortunes, perfectly happy not by the world. Whatever one may say, the happiest moment of the happy man is the moment of his falling asleep, and the unhappiest moment of the unhappy man, that of his awaking. An indirect but certain proof of the fact that men feel themselves unhappy, and consequently are so, is also abundantly afforded by the fearful envy which dwells in us all, and which, in all relations of life, on the occasion of any superiority, of whatever kind it may be, is excited, and cannot contain its poison. Because they feel themselves unhappy, men cannot endure the sight of one whom they imagine to be happy. He who, for the moment, feels himself happy would like to make all around him happy also. If life were in itself a blessing to be prized and decidedly to be preferred to non-existence, the exit from it would not need to be guarded by such fearful sentinels as death and its terrors. But who would continue in life as it is if death were less terrible? And again, who could even endure the thought of death if life were a pleasure? But thus, the former still has always this good about it, that it is the end of life. And we console ourselves with regard to the suffering of life with death, and with regard to death with the suffering of life. The truth is that the two inseparably belong to each other, for together they constitute a deviation from the right path, to return to which is as difficult as it is desirable. If the world were not something which, expressed practically, ought not to be, it would also not to be theoretically a problem. But its existence would either require no explanation, inasmuch as it would be so entirely self-evident that wonder concerning it or a question about it could arise in no mind, or its end would present itself unmistakably. Instead of this, however, it is indeed an insoluble problem, for even the most perfect philosophy will yet always contain an unexplained element, like an insoluble deposit or the remainder which the irrational relation of two quantities always leaves over. Therefore, if one ventures to raise the question why there is not rather nothing in this world, the world cannot be justified from itself. No ground, no final cause of its existence can be found in itself. It cannot be shown that it exists for its own sake, i.e., for its own advantage. In accordance with my teaching, this can certainly be explained from the fact that the principle of its existence is expressly one in which is without ground, a blind will to live, which, as thing of itself, cannot be made subject to the principle of sufficient reason, which is merely the form of the phenomena, and through which alone every why is justified. But this also agrees with the nature of the world, for only a blind will, no seeing will, could place itself in the position in which we behold ourselves. A seeing will would rather have made the calculation that the business did not cover the cost, for such a mighty effort and struggle with the straining of all the powers under constant care, anxiety, and want, and with the inevitable destruction of every individual life, finds no compensation in the ephemeral existence itself, which is so obtained and which passes into nothing in our hands. Hence, then, the explanation of the world from a will accompanied by knowledge necessarily demands optimism to excuse it, which accordingly is set up and maintained in spite of the loudly crying evidence of a whole world full of misery, Life is there given out to be a gift, while it is evident that everyone would have declined such a gift if he could have seen it and tested it beforehand. Just as Lessing admired the understanding of his son, who, because he had absolutely declined to enter life, had to be forcibly brought into the world with the forceps, but was scarcely there when he hurried away from it again. On the other hand, it is then well said that life should be, from one end to the other, only a lesson. To which, however, anyone might reply, for this very reason I wish I had been left in the peace of the all-sufficient nothing, where I would have had no need of lessons or of anything else. If indeed it should now be added that he must one day give an account of every hour of his life, he would be more justified in himself demanding an account of why he had been transferred from that rest into such a questionable, dark, anxious, and painful situation. To this, then, we are led by false views. For human existence, far from bearing the character of a gift, has entirely the character of a debt that has been contracted. The calling in of this debt appears in the form of the pressing wants, tormenting desires, and endless misery established through this existence. As a rule, the whole lifetime is devoted to the paying off of this debt, but this only meets the interest. The payment of the capital takes place through death. And when was this debt contracted? At the begetting. And to this world, to this scene of tormented and agonized beings who only continue to exist by devouring each other, in which therefore every ravenous beast is the living grave of thousands of others, and its self-maintenance is a chain of painful deaths, and in which the capacity for feeling pain increases with knowledge, and therefore reaches its highest degree in man, a degree which is the higher the more intelligent the man is, to this world it has been sought to apply this system of optimism, and demonstrate to us that it is the best of all possible worlds. The absurdity is glaring. But an optimist bids me to open my eyes and look at the world, how beautiful it is in the sunshine, with its mountains and valleys, streams, plants, animals, etc. These things are certainly beautiful to look at, but to be them is something quite different. Then comes a teleologist and praises to me the wise arrangement by virtue of which it is taken care that the planets do not run their heads together, that land and sea do not get mixed into a pulp, but are held so beautifully apart, also that everything is neither rigid with continual frost nor roasted with heat, in the same way that in consequence of the obliquity of the ecliptic, there is no eternal spring, in which nothing could attain to ripeness, etc. But this, and all like it, are mere conditions. If in general there is to be a world at all, if its planets are to exist at least as long as the light of a distant fixed star requires to reach them, and are not, like Lessing's sun, to depart again immediately after birth, then certainly it must not be so clumsily constructed that its very framework threatens to fall to pieces. But if one goes on to the results of this applauded work, considers the players who act upon the stage which is so durably constructed, and now sees how with sensibility pain appears, and increases in proportion as the sensibility develops to intelligence, and then how, keeping pace with this, desire and suffering come out ever more strongly, and increase till at last human life affords no other material than this for tragedies and comedies, then whoever is honest will scarcely be disposed to set up hallelujahs. He goes a little further, but I'm going to end it there. That's a good stopping point. Jesus Christ. Hopefully background noise wasn't too bad. Fuck, that was wasn't the first time I've read that over, but there you go. Just wanted to read that. I was in the mood to read some Schopenhauer. So there you have it.